Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Deep Learning with Poly AI. I'm joined here by Nicola, and I'm Michelle. And today we're going through three pieces of pretty interesting AI news that just basically hit digital newsstands. And I think that they might have a pretty interesting impact on CX. So we're just going to pontificate for a bit, maybe talk a little bit about how this might impact customer experience, how these kind of major progressions in technology, where they seem to be going. And just to spoil it, two out of three of these pieces of AI news are by OpenAI. So one of those is Sora, which is their text to video model that they just released. I don't think it's open to the public yet. They released it in beta.
No, no, I think they've let it, like the red teamers are working on it to see like
Uh,
what risks it has and how they need to let it.
that's something I love about OpenAI. Just a sidebar for a second. The other one is memory. So just the fact that ChatGPT will have memory. But OpenAI, if you ever read their sort of like product release notes and like the marketing materials that they put around product releases, they always anticipate every bit of sort of like fear and criticism that they might get, and they do it so elegantly. I just loved on the Sora page, they had a section that was like, "We know that this is going to be problematic, and this is how we're talking about it. This is how we're thinking about it." It's like they know their audience. They know safety is like needs to be one of their big headlines. I appreciate that. The Sora landing page actually has a video that was created of a guy running backwards on a treadmill. So the front of the treadmill where you're supposed to be facing is here, and the guy's running in the opposite direction. Fantastic. Anyway, second piece of news, memory. And then the third piece is this release, the R1 Rabbit release from Rabbit.tech, who just put out like an actual physical thing that looks a little bit like a piece of like gaming hardware. But they are also calling what they've released or what powers it a large action model. So this idea that you're taking action, like real world action outside of this digital thing. And what's cool is it's actually embodied in a real world thing. It's not a website that you go to interface with the AI. It's an actual thing that you can carry around. So that's the news. And I guess what we'll be talking about today is how we might see these trends, how we might see these leaps forward make their way into customer experience or make their way into our world, which is a contact center. Um, any initial thoughts just hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, if we go to our own like slightly smaller universe of customer experience, I think that a lot of people I've had conversations with distinctly remember the CIO of a French bank who, having never really deployed a voice assistant, said, "Hey, maybe we could pilot this on our website with like an animated avatar that people would talk to." And I was like, maybe, but in reality, that sounds like a science project, right? And
Yep.
I think we're kind of waiting for the world of AR VR that stalled for a while but seems to be picking up again to really like propel humanity into an era where we have better hardware for it, frankly.
Yeah.
Because if you're already like talking on the phone, you don't really need to see um, an avatar for like an assistant.
Right.
It's interesting, right? But like, I think like it's probably best left, and it will probably make more progress in the likes of gaming and other places where maybe education, right? Um, we've played around with this in the very early days of Poly AI before we were firmly set on customer service, and it's interesting, right? And there's a lot that like the agent itself, right? Ability to talk, hold these conversations, have memory as well. Like it's relevant, right? But I think like you have to figure out where that experience has a place
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. But I think going back to the point you made earlier, the AR VR kind of like developments that have happened. I think this is a really interesting point in history from a tech perspective where you have two, I wouldn't call them bubbles, but maybe some people would, but you have these sort of like two big like movements in tech happening at the same time. And one of them is generative AI, obviously, the one of the main or like most common themes on this podcast. Then you also have spatial computing. You also have AR, VR. Maybe the hardware isn't there yet. But the idea that these things come together somehow to help better support, a customer, that bag with the avatar, they might not have been onto the right thing just yet. But the idea that these kind of technologies help support a multimodal kind of support future, um, it's, I think, super, super interesting. And we're kind of starting to see a little bit of those worlds colliding. Um,
Yeah, there
you
was
know,
a bit of the pull towards it with consumer voice assistants, right? Where we thought that like it would be important for the brand to have like, Alexa skills, Google Actions, and then didn't happen yet. But like, the way that we build voice assistants to be like part of the brand, you can totally see how, I remember Raiffeisen Bank, kind of like big in Central Europe, has like this kind of like animated chatbot with like, um, a very think its logo is yellow and black, and like it's very well animated. Like it embodies them. I think other companies have done it too, like Bank of America with Erica. So obviously, like you actually go into the world of like VR, and you have like an actual person that is like your brand representative. Well,
yep,
there's opportunity in that. You could probably imagine that celebrities will be paid a lot of money
100%.
for scaled sales rep for, I don't know, Allstate or something like that.
Progressive, the
Mhm.
insurance company Progressive, Flow, their avatar, sort of like the company mascot.
Yeah,
I speaking at a conference a few months ago, just showcased the product. Talked a lot about it. It was really like a fact finding uh, panel for people to learn about technology like ours. And the amount of times I got the question, do you think that you could ever sample a voice? Like if you're selling for a company like Progressive that has an avatar already, that they have a mascot already that's associated with the brand, could you scale that basically? Could you make that work across, in this case, it wasn't multimodal, it was really just chat and voice. But there's a world in which maybe it's Flow that's actually helping you select, your
yep,
insurance, walking you through that process and putting an overlay, over your experience on the website.
absolutely. I think that's probably not that far off. I think you have a lot of companies that make these avatars. You can sing them a speech, so it's probably right around the corner, right? I mean, coming back to like Sora, it's going to be interesting. Just I haven't seen the pricing model for it, but obviously it's a lot more compute intensive. And I don't know about you, but I've wasted hours, designing like things with Dolly and stuff. And
Oh, yeah.
um, you know, like I'd love for it to work a lot faster. Like it's slow. Like it's like the main reason I haven't done way more with it is that it's slow, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen like people that I spend time with kind of like start something and they're like waiting, and they kind of like give up, right? And it's like the AI nerd in the room that stays playing. But the voice is going to be like, oh no, sorry, voice. The video is going to be a whole lot more demanding. So um, we might have to wait a few years until that's like actually like easily usable at scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe, but it is interesting. I saw like somebody screenshotted a message from about 9 years ago, I think on Reddit, and they said, "Oh, text to video." Somebody said this world is coming. This world in which you see somebody do a prompt that's just text, and then a video comes out. This is definitely coming, and they got flamed. Like the amount of comments underneath that was like, "This is so far off. Like it's not going to happen in our lifetime, buddy." It was like the most condescending kind of response, and it was so many people just kind of piling on this poor individual, and then that resurfaced,
Yep, yep.
as like one of those things. It's just like, who's laughing now? Like this is
Moore's law is merciless, right? I think that like once you cross like the the belief the capabilities of LLMs to like generate this much stuff, like
yeah,
hell, if it can do a photo, it'll definitely be able to do video, right?
for
I
sure.
think like the whole aspect just of like capturing physics, modeling the world in the right way and stuff.
Yeah.
It's probably gonna have some very interesting glitches, like the classical dolly generated thing where an extra arm find its way into the photo and it's coming out of your arm. That's like deeply, deeply disturbing, right? Like with
Yeah.
video, we're probably gonna see like more
Much worse.
complex phenomena. But okay, like it'll be ironed out like quickly.
I mean, but the fact that we did go from Dolly just a few years ago to Sora, I think that's telling you a lot about the rate of change here,
Yep.
and the pace of development. I think it's really, really cool. So when going back to multimodality and support, Like one of the things that I remember, um, like having run this in a sort of like a very technical environment where people were struggling with parts of their website or parts of their code was glitching their entire site. And so we'd literally have to log in and sometimes do a desktop takeover, like actually get into their computer and say, like, look, this is the problem. We can't help you. We can't touch your code because it's not. But I worked for a company like GoDaddy that did tech support uh, for web hosting businesses. So businesses that were hosting on our servers. And I remember that being like a legal problem. Like we weren't allowed to really go in and change anything, but
Yep.
we could show them. We could remote into their computer and we could show them like this is where you put a semicolon in the code, and that's why it's not
Yeah.
working. You basically broke the whole thing. And so we could show them stuff like that. And I wonder if like this, this idea that, from our last podcast where we talked about, the call center being potentially fully automated, maybe even as soon as 5 years from now,
Yeah.
probably more like 10.
Yeah.
But like, let's say a world like that, you start to see Sora being extremely valuable. And you start seeing like the input part of that, like being able to sort of take in information about what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
seeing and push that back out, and generate something that's supporting whatever you're trying to solve. I mean, all of these things feel like they're coming together in a really interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
way.
So, I mean, the Rabbit announcement is the part of this kind of like the universe of that, right? Where like you have a controller like be able to do all that for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's the promise of the rabbit? I actually don't remember. I think it was you it takes in your requests and then it like let's say you have, I don't know, like a delivery issue with a food delivery or something like that. Is it one of those things that's actually solving all sorts of problems just by being connected to a bunch of different APIs or a bunch of different, function calls for different types of businesses? Like really, do you remember what the promise of it was?
Uh, so I'm looking at it now, and I think that it's kind of like like it's there to use your apps for you, and I think maybe to abstract away some of the work you'd have to
Mhm.
do. So you could think of it, I think, partially as a bit of an API controller, right? For all of those things.
That's cool. That's very cool. There was a company, I don't know what happened to it, but like one of those sort of they were in stealth. They had like a very, very big, very overhyped beta. Did you ever hear of this company called Magic?
Yeah.
Like Get Magic you could text it and it would act like your concierge. It's like, hey, I reservation at this restaurant and I need to
Yeah.
have the world's best car, at the same time because I'm picking up I don't know. I'm going on like the date of my life. And so I need all these things to kind of, happen at the same time. And it was supposed to be able to kind of go out into the real world,
The
make all these.
promise was that as people do it, that over time we create like the right ontologies and things to learn how to do it with machines, right? And that
Yep.
maybe that's okay, right? I mean, like when you think about like training LLMs, like a lot of it was done with like humans doing stuff repeatedly, like labeling it with positive or negative signals as well.
Yeah.
So maybe, but I don't know if that delivered just yet. I don't think it did. But I've always thought, and like from the time that I was at Siri onwards, like I've thought about this, like, why Siri? Why are people so dissatisfied with it, right? And you hear a lot of like vitriolic stuff, like, oh, it doesn't work for this or that. But like, truth be told, for the things that, like it needs to do, it actually kind of works, right?
Yeah.
You just know how to do something. So a bit of an interface issue. But a lot of that appeal, and I almost think that the word assistant didn't help, right? Because you imagine this entity that knows everything about you, that has context for your life, that is basically a clone of you, right? And I think we did like the whole thing a bit of a disservice by framing it almost as a simple, you know, task in the pursuit of AI, GI, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Where we were like, hey, we just need to build that. And then later we can, like, I don't know, go solve cancer or deal with more complicated problems. Whereas the truth is, if you were to have anything like, ideal end state of Siri, which kind of sounds like magic, and I guess Rabbit is working to support that future. I mean, I like what they're doing because that's like kind of, a step that you need and like a way to collect data and create the interface, which is actually useful. But I think that it's almost an approximation of you, and
Yeah.
the judgment of quality for that assistant is really much more about like did it do what you would have done?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
then you probably have even more inflated expectations because at least, it can go and look at every airplane, like every way that you could get from city A to B. And, it should know that you maybe don't like early flights, don't mind layovers or you mind layovers. And it's just like a really difficult thing to get right. I know whenever like, someone else is doing like planning for travel and stuff, I get annoyed, and I would have probably been done a worse job myself. But it's very easy. It's hard to know like whether it actually did a good job. But that memory, like knowing your preferences and all of that, and that's kind of like c- coming to the OpenAI thread around memory.
Yeah.
Like it needs to know a lot about you, right? Like what you
Yeah.
would have done in certain situations. And collecting those kinds of subtle preferences is difficult. And even if you have an EA, right, and you work with them, right, I think that it takes a long time to actually like delegate things super confidently because they
Yeah.
don't know the priority of different meetings. They don't know the importance of like this person versus that. They don't know that you'd maybe happily skip this one meeting to go have a beer with this person when they're in town, and maybe you would never do that otherwise, right?
Sure.
And it's very highly contextual. Probably
Right.
depends on your mood on a given day, right? Like, and that just then becomes like, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right?
You
If
know,
you're consistent.
what's interesting, you mentioned an EA, so an executive assistant. And what's interesting about this and why I think Siri was a necessary stepping stone on the way to AGI and the way to what Rabbit's paving the way for, um, is that people don't have real world context on average for an assistant, right? They're not used to dictating text messages to somebody. They're not used to kind of like having something that understands the flight, the best flights that they like to take, or
Yeah, yeah,
what they're willing to do on a day-to-day basis or from a calendar perspective. So, and probably the same for your for that bank that wanted that avatar. People aren't used to seeing the support representative when they're making a call or they're chatting with someone. So that's not a real world context that adds value in that
yeah.
scenario. You have to teach people to want that. Fortunately, in my opinion, that was never taught. I wouldn't like to see a digital avatar while I'm chatting with somebody. That doesn't add value to me. But a Siri will and does and has continued to add more, in my opinion, um, as it's progressed. And I think probably the same is true for what Rabbit's doing. Like if we think of, they called it R1, pr- presumably there's an R2 coming at some point. But the idea that they're teaching us how to interface with something, they're teaching us about sort of human and machine interaction that we did not know before, that we didn't have context for
Yep.
in the
Yep. Yep.
past. Whereas you have experience with EAs and you want them already. Already you have the expectation. They should be able to think like me in this moment, in this context, and then bring me a response um,
Yep.
that I would have made. Whereas I think the average person doesn't, which is why the consumer perspective of OpenAI and Rabbit are so interesting. It's so interesting to watch for as a business building for businesses.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. And kind of like for us, a voice assistant for an enterprise doing a task at scale can do really well, and you can optimize it and create like a really, really good thing. But like, yeah, on that personal consumer level, I think like the basic version, which is what Siri was for some things, it's like, as you said, who actually has someone typing out their text messages? It's just
Yeah,
one thing. And then you judge it against like, ideal performance, it misspells something, and then you're very frustrated, right? And like honestly, like you probably just shouldn't do that anyway, because it's not the best use of it. But I think it's going to, I mean, when you mentioned magic, like that's exactly like the promise, right? And
yeah,
I think it's just like we're very different people, right? And like you're spot on that like people have different expectations of what they would like to do. And then like the usefulness of the thing becomes like, can it get you in the loop in a way that still makes the experience a lot better for you?
yes.
Because let's say that it used, I don't know, Kayak and not
Oh
Skyscanner
yeah,
for a thing, and one
yeah,
works better, and you're like, oh, but it didn't do BA, and I have like BA loyalty status, and just the whole thing collapses, even though it might have done like a really good job.
yeah.
Right?
It
Like
doesn't
that's
know
like,
me. It doesn't
yeah,
have my context. Which is what makes this memory thing so interesting. Like coming from kind of like a customer data background.
yep,
The thing that is interesting about this, or like super, super interesting, is OpenAI, like one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing consumer products ever. Um, it now will be a huge treasure trove of first party data straight from not even the customer's mouth. It's almost like, first party data back in the day used to mean, well, you gave me your name, number,
Yeah, yeah,
age, income, email
yeah.
address. Now it's going to mean I know your kid's name. I know what kind of school you want them to get. I know your aspirations. I know what you
Yep.
dream of. I know what you need therapy about. Like I know everything
Mhm.
about you. And
All I
that
see is dollar
context,
signs. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like advertising gold, right? I mean, just that like pictorial representation of like, you know, like Michelle. And the best thing is like, there used to be a lot of talk of like differential privacy and stuff like that. Like this doesn't have to have your name tagged against it, right? As long as you live in the part of the vector space that says, like advertise this to
yep,
Nicole and this Michelle, like and like, it's a very highly dimensional vector space. It can
yep,
capture things where we have similar preferences and different ones. And it's going to be like a really, really valuable thing for advertisers. Uh,
definitely,
and
definitely.
maybe we're just cynics here because really what it's about is getting you closer to that like perfect assistant that can have all
Yeah.
this evidence. But yeah,
And
those type of
selling a
things,
bunch of
right?
stuff.
Someone has to make money off of it.
Exactly. And selling a bunch of stuff, paying for all the data footprint that it's generating.
Yeah.
Um, but
Fair,
yeah,
fair, very fair.
yeah, I know, but I do think it's really interesting. Like the idea that in order to provide, and this is like an issue that I think most anybody who's thinking about customer experience is grappling with anyway, which is in order to provide a great experience, in order to predict anything about what you want and what we think you should do next, you need a tremendous amount of context. And the way it was done before is you tell us a bit of information and we'd extrapolate on top of what we think you want and who we think you are based off of
Yeah.
profiles that are really just in aggregate. It's not like the promise, I think, of like a purely like perfectly personalized, perfect understanding, perfect context about an individual. I'm not
Oh, no,
sure.
no. I'll give you a counterexample, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I'm in a hotel room. I came here, relatively new TV. So what do? I log in on YouTube because then basically my personal like feed of things like they keep me occupied for like 10 hours. It's there, right? Like I don't want it to know that I'm like
Yep.
a Serbian man living in the UK in my 30s because
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
don't want to watch another basketball clip about Nikola Jokic. I don't, right? Like, but if you show me everything about, like
Yeah.
the Russia-Ukraine war and other things that I spend time watching. Like,
Yeah.
like I kind of want to see that in my feed, right? Because it's something that I'm following very actively, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
it knows that based off of your behavior, which makes
or has my
makes
full browsing history. I think if someone deleted my YouTube browsing history, so my recommendations get worse, I would feel separation from a body part at this point. So I'm on this side of like, like have my data if you're going to give me better
yeah.
products, right?
If
But
you're
then
gonna
there are
keep
people
people
who use Google Maps without like, a history. They're just selfish because they're not contributing. Our hive mind.
love
Yeah.
it. I love this. So like that's the message to take away from all of this, guys. Like everybody needs to use all of
Disclaimer,
these
Poly
tips.
will not use your data in this way. We're actually extremely
100%.
enterprise friendly and we do not store any of this data. But I hope
Yeah.
OpenAI does for the benefit of future consumer
Yeah.
products.
I mean, yeah. And the nice thing is, for the most part, this idea that your chat experience is now going to have memory will not cost you more as a user. Um,
Yeah.
but it will give you a much better experience. I mean, you can see already how it would.
Yeah.
Um, and just carry forward conversations or thoughts or ideas that you're having. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a million ways where we can see this kind of get better over time, but there's a reason why I think things like consumer level AI products are so important, especially when you're thinking about them and how they change the culture, how they change the perception of AI, from the consumer first, so that enterprises can use them to drive
Absolutely right. And
value.
I think that like, our small part in doing this and just like as an example, right? Um, we launched with a bank in a country where this might have been the first voice assistant. And initially, we saw like changes in behavior that we don't typically see like in the English speaking world, right? Where like initially there were first like some silences and then like later like they just dropped and the
Yeah.
engagement rose and rose as people like had their second, third interaction with the voice assistant. And that's just like reformatting consumer behavior, right?
Yep.
And we see much higher initial success rates actually in markets where people haven't had previous voice IVR
Oh,
experiences.
that's interesting.
Like I remember listening to some Polish calls where like people go on, it's just immediate life story. It's not like your average American where 1 in 5 people scream for the operator immediately, right? And that's just like, like a different starting point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we've broken the trust, I think, a lot in the US around, data and the promise that it was going to make your life better around IVRs and automation, the promise that you were going to get to your answer faster because we sacrificed, I think, for a very long time, the quality of that interaction in favor of the speed and the operational efficiency. And I think that now that we're starting to flip and there are companies like us that think about it in the reverse, which is like, how can you maintain
Yeah.
that standard, the trust should theoretically go up, but just imagining, which is something that, that example that you gave, you don't have to imagine anymore. In a world in which that trust was never broken, you could probably build it up a lot faster by having these great interactions where people are like, "Oh, this works. Like
Yeah.
this is not what I was expecting."
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's I mean it's prevalent with technology like around the world, right? Like places that never had dial up and started with like ADSL like have a, had much better internet for a while, right? And then like other places got fiber first because like they were fed up with like weaker previous generation. So yeah, like I think interesting. Like equally, I think there's a large part of the planet. While the excitement of like ChatGPT is huge, especially like you know like in California and the UK and the East Coast,
Mm.
like I think there are like huge segments of society that are not actually like using it in their daily life. And
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife. She was at work and like just testing it because she has access to it. She's like, summarize daily news. It's like, oh, I don't have this information. And she's like, it doesn't work. And I'm like, it's like, but it can do so many other things, but like, it doesn't work.
It
And I
doesn't
think
work.
we forget that, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you ask us something obvious, it's an omnipowerful AI. Like, what are today's headlines? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm trading on that. Like, as far as consumer goes, it doesn't work, right? Like, or like so I think like we as like technologists and stuff, we get overexcited and we project far. But I think
There's no doubt.
calibration from user feedback is important.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I think just even though that Reddit user that talked about, the fact that text to video was around the corner, I think equally, like we could have been humbled by the idea that, yeah, sure, maybe it is, but it doesn't work, and that being the end of the conversation. I think we've all been humbled by thinking, oh, this is just right around the corner.
I
Or,
mean, autonomous driving above all, right? Like,
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, looking forward to the next conversation. We talk about what else is
yeah,
around the corner, what other impacts we're going to see happening from AI to CX. As always, great talking with you, Nicola, and talk soon.
same. See you later.